Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This week, I was lucky enough to chat with Emmy-nominated and White House Award-winning director Fiona Dawson about the pilot episode of her show, Now with Fiona, which screened at ATX Television Festival Season 10. The unscripted episode, hosted by Dawson, kicks off with a Honduran transgender woman's inspiring story of kindness and courage in the face of adversity. We talk about that, making the show, the value of empathy, and much more. It's a wonderful chat, and I hope you enjoy.
I am so excited to get to talk to you, both because the show looks great, but also the story behind making the show is great. I'm always thrilled to hear
Thank you.
How people make that decision to make that jump from a safe career or a corporate world or whatever a quote-unquote real career looks like, and then making that scary, nope, you know what, I'm going to try for television. I'm going to go for this thing that... half the audience views as like being made in a magic Willy Wonka fantasy world, and you've got to go figure out how to do it. Can you talk a little bit about both the documentaries you've made and then getting into making Now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I blame Oprah Winfrey for my life.
As do we all.
I think I mean, why not, right? Because
she can take it.
I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I just knew that I had to do it, and I was going to just figure it out, and it would just reveal itself. And the whole journey of my last 11 years, since I literally quit my job to make my dreams come true without a plan and just a vision, has been an extraordinary life experience in itself. And it's been very much, I think, of a personal growth opportunity, to say it mildly. So, I mean, I guess I'll start there because it kind of like weaves into the film projects that I've ended up doing. Because in 2010, I was living in Houston, Texas, as I'm sure you can tell from the accent. I love Texas. It's hot and cheap. And I abandoned the United Kingdom in 1998 and very much made America and Texas my home. So there was I working a corporate social responsibility for a bank. I've always had a passion for human rights and saving the world. But my job just wasn't fulfilling my soul. And I had already had experience speaking on live stages, speaking on TV and radio, representing the charities that I'm very passionate about. And Oprah launched her own network, and she had a competition to win your own show. And I realized that there was nothing more that I wanted to do with my life than host my own show, but sharing positive stories of kindness and courage, because we're constantly surrounded by negative news, which, while I don't deny the reality of the horrific things that are happening, but for every one of those situations, there's always going to be at least one, if not hundreds of people that are actively doing things to make it better. And I really want to uplift those stories to inspire good in the world and to inspire change and authenticity and equality and equity, and just generally make the world a better place. So I came up with the concept of Now with Fiona back in 2010, entered Oprah's competition, had never made TV before, but managed to put together a sizzle. I didn't win the competition, but I decided, well, hell, I'm going to do it anyway. So thanks to some generous friends, I raised some money on Kickstarter, and I went to India and shot a pilot there, and I came back to Texas, into Houston, and like, oh, post-production, that's a thing. And I decided that I needed to move to a city that was more actively making the kind of TV content that I wanted to make. So I threw my belongings in the back of a U-Haul, drove myself to New York City, and got immediate culture shock and decided to, pound the pavements pitching Now with Fiona. So let's roll into 2012, and I've been doing my best with Now with Fiona, but as an LGBTQ advocate, as an out bisexual woman, I had been doing advocacy around the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and it wasn't until 2012 that I realized that now we had achieved that repeal, lesbian, gay, and bi people could serve, but trans people were still banned. And I'm like, well, why aren't we talking about this? And so I already had friends who were trans and in the military, and I decided to start documenting their stories, originally to be in my unscripted series Now with Fiona. But what morphed from there is when I fortunately got picked up by the New York Times. They commissioned a short op doc that I put together with my colleagues, Gabe and Jamie, and the three of us made Transgender at War and in Love. And off it went. Like, it's kind of like the universe throws you a bunch of lessons and then pushes you up the ladder a little bit and then puts you down a bit and makes you learn some more. But that short doc, Transgender at War and in Love, ended up being Emmy nominated, and we decided that we needed to finish telling this story, and Gabe, Jamie, and I continued making the feature documentary Trans Military. That premiered at South by Southwest 2018, won the Audience Award. So now we've brought me into late 2018, 2019, and I had to think, well, what am I going to do next? I'm like, well, there's nothing more that I want to do than host this damn show that I started back in 2010. So I decided to go back into independent production and filmed the proof of concept episode that you're going to see screening at ATX Television Festival, and went through post-production through the pandemic last year. And I'm delighted to have finally given birth to something for people to see, because Now with Fiona is really what I know I'm born to do, in probably in various forms and fashions, but I just continue to want to focus on the positive stories and make the world a better place that way.
That's great. And on the one hand, I love, as much as I love watching things like John Oliver and such, I frequently come away from it going, okay, you've lined out a problem that I don't think we're going to do anything about. And
Exactly.
it can pile up. But at the same time, in the last couple of years, we've all gotten to be witness to this rise of just ignore the bad positivity, which isn't necessarily helpful either. And I really like this distinction of promoting stories that aren't not seeing the problem, but are focusing on a solution or looking at, yes, we acknowledge that this is a problem, but what is happening with it, and where, what positive is happening around our discussion of it. When it comes to documentaries, I think for the longest time, I never really put together that there's a narrative at play there. That Ken Burns is telling me a story about the Civil War. It's not just, here's all of the information we gathered, go through it. There's there's a narrative through line. When it comes to picking your stories or telling your stories, what do you look for in kind of themes and how you're constructing these stories? Has that been a learning curve? Going from, I want to shine a light on this subject, I have to make a coherent hour of television out of it? Has that been difficult to come up with the stories there?
For me, the story doesn't feel difficult. I've certainly had a big learning curve from the technical perspective of filmmaking, because I didn't go to film school. And so I do my best to learn from others and learn by trial and error and doing it myself in terms of how to technically put something together. But I would say for me, the story just seems to naturally emerge as I continue to make a connection with the characters, as it were, or the people whose story that I'm telling. So Kate, for example, in the proof of concept of Now with Fiona, she just appeared to me like magic. And I know it sounds a bit woo-woo to say this, but I do strongly believe that the people whose story I need to tell seem to magnetize themselves into my life without me trying to dig too deep to find them. So I knew that I wanted to share a positive story about a trans woman of color, because we need that inspiration. Like, just yesterday, it was announced that more trans and non-binary people have been murdered in 2001 than the total of 2019. And we're not even 6 months into the year, right? The official reported number of trans homicides is 28. individuals this year. And so I wanted to share a narrative of somebody who was surviving and thriving. So we see famous celebrities and actresses and actors and performers and entertainers who are trans, and they're embraced. But what about the quote unquote everyday people? Like, included in the proof of concept is this Black trans woman who's a flight attendant, and I ask her, what's it like to be a flight attendant, expecting her to say, well, people treat me like shit. But instead, she burst out laughing, saying how much she loves it. And it's like, that joy is right there when you ask the question and when you uncover it. Mm-hmm. And Kate, I went to Casa Ruby, a charity that I knew that helped trans people in the Washington, D.C. area. And I just went there to see who was hanging out and see whose story I could tell. And all of a sudden, I'm being presented with Kate, who can't speak English, but the translator is telling me, well, here, will Kate do? It's almost like they're going, is this good enough? She, escaped murder by the police, traveled through the caravan, nearly died in a river, but look at her, she's here with a smile on her face. Is this a story good enough? And I'm like, yes.
Trauma survival resume is just...
Yes. And so in some ways, it just feels like when you have it inside your heart that you're wanting to attract these stories, the universe or whatever the powers that be, attract them back to you. And that's the magic of it. And so I feel like once you've done the interview and you've captured the story, and then you're in post and you're figuring out how to piece it together, for me, that's the hardest place to be ruthless, because I know I've got to keep it short and I've got to keep an audience engaged. And for me, every single thing that happens is amazing and engaging. And I have to remind myself, no, actually, some people might be bored by this, Fiona. So it's like that's the piece that I have to keep practicing and learning to be discerning and in telling the story and making sure that I'm keeping to the sweet spots, the best bits, no matter how brilliant I think everything else is.
Oh, I mean, I have a hard time on 15-minute chats with folks from television of no, everything said in that interview was amazing, and I have to release all of it.
Right?
I was there; it was all good.
Yeah.
I know when I sit down to watch these, I'm going to learn a lot. When you were going into these stories, already, at least knowing what you wanted to look into, what's been the most surprising thing for you that you've learned where you went, oh, I did not understand the situation the way I thought I did?
Okay. So you mean, surprising as in what I've learned from other people's stories? Yes.
Or have you had a moment where you got into a story and in deepening your understanding, it changed the thrust of what you were saying?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I was interviewing Kate, I already had a high level of what her story was like. But there we are doing the interview, and it's through a translator. So you have to go through the process of listening intently to her while she's speaking Spanish, even though I can't understand anything she's saying, and having to read off the body language and then wait for the translator and then absorb what she just said and then go back. And I remember distinctly sitting opposite Kate, looking her in the eye as she's speaking a language that I can't understand, and really kind of sucking and feeling the energy of her words, getting a sense of realizing she was telling me something really powerful. And then when I'm looking at her, we're both in silence, and I'm listening to the translator telling me how she was actually saying how she was drowning in the river, and she was so scared that she was not going to survive, and she had to let go of this plastic bag that had the only belongings that she had taken from home. And in order to be able to swim, even though she can't swim, and luckily was rescued by a friend who threw a life raft. When I realized that I had been listening to her recount and actually relive that experience in my mind, I was having a holy, shit moment, thinking, I can't believe that I'm actually sitting opposite somebody who went through that. Because that year, we'd been hearing the then president put down this caravan of people that were coming to raid our country, right? And so the caravan had been riled up in the media as being these people that were, going to come and take over America. And here am I sitting opposite somebody who was in that caravan and realizing she could be dead, and she's not, though, and I got chills, feeling like I was meeting a celebrity almost. Like, it was that surreal moment. So I think that as being LGBTQ myself and being an advocate for, I don't know, over 15 odd years in our work, a lot of the issues and nuances that LGBTQ people face don't typically surprise me. What surprised me was actually meeting someone who had been going through the very stories that usually we just hear or see on the news. Like, we've got that removed distance from it. And that's when I got chills and realized, wow, like, the powers that be, you know, some people might say God, I say the universe. Like, this was divine intervention that we were brought together for me to do the best I could to get this story out there. And that's beautiful.
Yeah. And it really reorients your perspective on what the worst thing that's ever happened to me might be then. And what your role is then in helping this moment be as valuable as possible, of getting this story told and getting this out there. I can't imagine living through it, much less recounting it, much less than sitting there and waiting for a translator to say it again. That's just got to be one of the strangest moments. In terms of your own learning process on LGBTQ stuff, I feel like in the last couple of years, I'm so thrilled for the increase in knowledge about transgender issues and just facts and terms. I love your email, Sig, for defining those. And I feel like we've all heard this kind of backlash of, how can there be this many genders, or how all of this new information that everybody has to learn? And I find it personally a bit ridiculous, but I mean, the burden of learning people's pronouns when we can all learn new married names and such. But
exactly.
But I do understand how my mom's generation, for example, my mom feels like something sea change shifted underneath, or that it's a constant learning curve, that every time she picks up a bit of knowledge, she's still slightly wrong in her understanding of it sometimes. Has there been a learning curve for you as you've gotten into these issues, even being LGBTQ yourself? Have you found yourself having to occasionally take a breath and go, okay, no, I need to deepen my understanding of that a bit?
Yes, absolutely. And I am grinning to answer this question because I'm so excited that I feel like I've had a revolutionary overhaul of the way I'm perceiving things, even in the last year or two. And I think for me, identifying as a bisexual woman and a trans ally and advocate has positioned me into a good place to be able to do that. And I've been doing a lot of reading and research and writing about it, because I'm actually writing a book that will be coming out October the 11th on National Coming Out Day. And the title of the book is Are Bisexuals Just Greedy? And it's 21 explainers about the terms and definitions within the LGBTQ community that is specifically written for people like your mother. So hopefully I can give her a copy. And what I have come to realize through my filmmaking work and through writing this book is that gender as a binary construct is actually a very new, novel construct. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, humans didn't have a concept of gender as a binary. My latest mission statement in life is to decolonize the worldview of gender and sexuality, and realizing that just straight and just male and female has been a system that has come in to control us across the world. So people like my forebears, who came in, quote unquote, discovered America and other places in the world, came and put in these structures in order to keep a society controlled. And what is so exciting about the time that we're living in now is that we have an opportunity to deconstruct that and decolonize that and break that down, and realize that throughout humanity, there are scores of different genders that have already existed and already freely lived in various cultures, including the Americas. So with native indigenous people here in the United States, they quite happily had two-spirit individuals. They already recognized a third gender. And then, there are supposedly like 72 different names for genders, but I wouldn't be surprised if like the type gender is really uncountable, because there are so many different nuances and across that spectrum. So for me, in my work, I've definitely seen that, because in 2004 is when I first came out, and I first came out as a lesbian, and it was simply because I had ended a relationship that was straight, and for the first time I was in a relationship with a woman, and kind of skipped over bisexual, thinking, oh, I'm in a relationship with a woman, therefore I must be a lesbian. And it took me like 7 or 8 years later to realize, you know what, actually I have the capacity to be attracted to somebody regardless of their gender, and there's a B in LGBT, and I came to understand that bisexual was the right term for me. And in fact, studies show that 52% of the lesbian, gay and bi community actually identifies bisexual. There are more bi people within our community than lesbian and gay, but because of media, our stories haven't been told, and we have greater stigma and discrimination. It's much harder for people to come out, and that's a whole other presentation. But what we're finding now is that actually trans, non-binary, gender expansive, bi plus people have existed across time and across cultures for centuries, but we just haven't been seen. And so for me as a filmmaker, I'm extremely excited to be able to take the knowledge that I'm personally gaining through, one, my personal experience, and then two, through reading and listening to other people's stories. And then I want to make content that reaches people, again, like your mom. Like, I don't want to preach to the choir. I want to empower the choir. And I want to help people who don't understand what it means to exist across a spectrum and are so scared of leaving that binary. Like, I want to hold their hand and tell them it's going to be okay, and we don't need to be scared, and it's all right if people don't identify with these structures that were imposed upon us during colonized period.
Yeah. No, and that term is exactly the way to phrase that. I feel decolonizing this is if you're listening to this and you don't think that grammatically makes sense, go look that up. We are using the correct term.
We are. It's becoming a thing. This isn't a revolutionary thing that I had.
We did not make this up right now.
No, we didn't.
And you're right. Bi erasure is a huge issue, both in both the straight community and in the LGBTQ community. Being oppressed in that way for so long makes it so that when I was growing up in the South, being a boy, that there was no half gay. If you seemed gay at all, you were gay, and all that would terrifyingly entail. And so it was only a couple of years ago that I came out to I'm 43, came out to my parents as bi. Because I didn't know. That's awesome. And I spent a long time thinking that that's not a thing. When you said the title of your book, that was literally a not joke, but joke told to me when I was in high school of like somebody, there was some reference to a bi character on a show or a movie, and I remember somebody saying like, oh yeah, they're just greedy, haha. And in my brain, I went, well, we're going to file that. Oh, that is definitely not what we get to admit to be. And these issues are real, and that erasure is real. And I feel like the way that I often want to discuss these things, like you say, preaching to the choir, where I'm talking abstractly about shorthand terms that we've all read the theory on, and that's going to tune my mom out. Whereas meeting Kate won't. Yeah. And I feel like telling a personal story, I feel like seeing Laverne Cox on people's televisions, I feel like helped in a way that me talking about the science behind gender for a year will never do the same thing. And I find it particularly, I want this information out there, particularly because in talking about that deepening, like often when I think about trans issues, I find the media often talking about Laverne Cox, who is amazingly attractive and trans in the way that society's a little more grudgingly accepting of. And for example, being a bi guy in the South was not the same as I don't feel as being a girl could experiment in college in a way that I could not. And similarly, the friends of mine that are not not non-binary in a well, I picked a spot in the middle of your binary. Like, you know, the distinction between like, no, I'm not a 60-40 split of non-binary. I am off that linear scale completely. By making friends like that, I've started to realize, even when I thought, I've woke up and got this ally mindset, I understand non-binary people, I was still limited and shallow in my thinking. It keeps deepening. The more of people you meet, the more stories you hear. And so I can't wait to see the pilot episode, but I'm excited to see everything you do on Now with Fiona, just because I know that this is how television helps. This is how meeting people can change the world.
Yes. Thank you. And there's something else that I would like to talk about that's in the pilot that I'm excited for you to see. And I would love anyone listening to find this little snippet, because I cut it out of the episode and put it on YouTube. So within the storytelling, I want to educate all of us, like even within the LGBTQ community, we don't understand all of our terms and definitions. And then especially your mom, in fact, please show your mom this 2-minute animation that's on YouTube. And it's basically breaking down the difference between the word cisgender and transgender. So within the storytelling, we have an opportunity to be able to take any of these terms and definitions that might come up within the LGBTQ characters and then kind of do a record scratch and a side break and say, okay, I'm just going to quickly define this word for you. And then we're going to come back into the story. And I have found, when you ask me like what's surprising, in addition to the surprising parts of the story, what I have found very pleasantly surprising is that this 2-minute piece of animation has been so well received that people are like, they want more of it, which is why I ended up writing the book, because the book is basically scripts that I would like to turn into animation. So the first one is like, what's the difference between cisgender and transgender? And then other things like, is coming out as gender non-binary just cool these days? You know, another animation on Are Bisexuals Just Greedy, which I'm so happy to hear you heard as well, because that's something that my father said to me when I was a teenager. And also like, how do transgender women pee in a public restroom? And of course, that starts off with, well, first of all, it's none of our freaking business how anyone pees in a restroom. But seeing as you're asking, and let me explain. And so I just think that, we just have this opportunity to be able to take these terms and definitions that seem so out there and so foreign to other people and actually kind of break them down in a very bare bones way to help people understand. And I hope that your mum will watch this 2-minute video and then say, oh, I know what cisgender means. That would be great.
She's going to be mortified as if I've called her. I don't mean to make my mom to be the villain of this.
Oh, I love dragging our parents
wonderful.
into this.
But I do feel like she doesn't. When I talk about these issues and if I sound hesitating or I'm trying to be careful, it's because it affects me and affects people I directly love. I mean, it affects people I see or speak to every week. And I know that it's different for folks who don't personally know anyone who they feel is directly affected by this. And to them, I will say that you don't actually, you have people who just don't trust you to tell you. You absolutely know some people affected by this.
Exactly.
Every time I hear anybody say, well, I don't know any bisexual people, like, no, you have scared friends.
Exactly. They just don't come out. And including lesbian and gay people who are too scared to come out as bi. I know a lot of people that actually privately tell me they're bi, but they allow everyone else to think they're lesbian and gay because it's easier. Mm-hmm. And probably you know the same.
And it's a chilling effect that happens to both sides. It's not just fear of coming out as bi to straight people. It's you have to be in the protected group then because of the danger. It shorts everyone. This prejudice, I feel. Thank you so much for talking to me about it all today. I know we went a little bit long, but of course I'm not going to edit any of it. And
good. I'll talk for a long time if someone let me. So thank you for trying to curb me. This is an amazing conversation, and I would love to continue it at any time.
Well, I'm so sad that it's not an in-person festival this year. I absolutely appreciate why it's virtual, but hopefully at a future fest we can meet and hang out I'll have to see that PowerPoint presentation where you quit your job.
That would be incredible. Great. I have lots of PowerPoint presentations for everything. In fact, I created a PowerPoint to my boss and presented it to him in a gay bar over a cocktail, telling him why I needed to quit my job. So there's that.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, thank you so much.
You, Les.
Have a great rest of your day.
And you take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
TV Dudes is an independently run podcast out of Austin, Texas. We are exclusively listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/TVDudes.
You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TV Dudes. All the music for our show is done by our friend and original TV dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith.
To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com. I'm Randy Lander.
I'm Les Weiler.
And I'm Kyle Scott.
Thanks for listening.